Let's go ahead and get this thing to order and start this afternoon. Appreciate everybody coming up, doing yet another meeting for Move I-15 through Temecula Valley Regional Task Force Committee. Appreciate all the cities showing up. I know probably some folks are running a little bit behind. We have some RSVPs that haven't been here just yet, so we're going to go ahead and keep it moving and do a quick roll call if we could. Let's see here. City of Murrieta.
We're here.
All right. City of Wildemar. City of Lake Elsinore.
Here.
So you guys, City of Menifee. Canyon Lake.
Right here.
All right. Well, Temecula, we're here. Pechanga.
Here.
Palaband is not.
They said they weren't going to be able to make it.
Yeah. All right. Congressman Calvert, good afternoon. Senator Jeff Stone, Riverside County Board of Supervisors, 3rd District.
Here.
There you are. All right. RCTC, WRCOG, thank you. Riverside County Department of Transportation. Okay. Southern California Association of Governments.
On the phone.
On the phone. Thank you for joining us on the phone. District 8, Caltrans. Oh, there you are. All right. And District 11? No. And Sandag? No. All right. All right. Do we have any public comments? Anybody? All right, because it's a public meeting, I'm going to go ahead and read this, and then we'll invite our folks to come up to the podium there. A total of 15 minutes provided for members of the public to address the committee on items that are not listed on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. If you desire to speak to the committee about an item not on the agenda, a request to speak form may be filed and filled out with the staff liaison. When you are called to speak, please come forward, state your name for the record. For all other agenda items, a request to speak form may be filed with staff liaison prior to committee addressing that item. There is a 5-minute time limit for individual speakers there. So, who do we have? All right. Topic item on the agenda. Okay, so non-agenda items. Mr. Tom Stoba, is that correct? All right. If you want to hop on up to the podium there, we'd be happy to hear you. Good afternoon. Did I get your last name right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right.
I'm just a private citizen, but I've lived in the valley here since 1988, and I've seen the traffic get better. I've seen it get worse, and it's probably the worst I've ever seen it, not only within the city, but especially on the I-15. It seems like, especially, and maybe you guys talked about this, I'm not sure, but it seems like especially in the afternoon with the, rush hour, quote unquote, traffic going northbound, it seems like the biggest problem is past Winchester Road in the I-15. It would be so easy, I think, to expand the lane because as the cars are merging from Winchester Road going northbound onto the I-15, first there's a little bit of a lane, and then that lane gets cut off and there's no lane, and then about a half mile down, then it widens again to another lane so that people can go up the 215 and the 15 where the split is. Why not just expand the 15 using maybe the shoulder initially, however you can do it? I know it's a safety problem and all that foolishness, but why not expand that it's about a little over a half a mile and make that one additional lane so that people that are going onto the 15 from Winchester, if they're going up the 215, they can stay in that lane and they don't have to merge over, because that seems to be one of the big bottlenecks. And it would seem to me that expanding one lane for a little over a half a mile yeah, I know it's gonna cost money, but, you know, that would certainly be a short fix, and I think that would help the situation tremendously. Thank you. Unless
All
anybody
right,
has
thank
any
you so much.
questions.
No, we're good. Appreciate that. I think that'll come out, a lot of your comments will come out in some of the reports today and conversation about the French Valley Parkway and all that. Appreciate that. Thank you, and seeing no other comments, we will take the comment on the Caltrans update when we get to that agenda item in just a moment. First, we're going to start with the staff report WRCOG commuter study brought back to the folks. If we could get a staff report on that, that'd be great.
Well, I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Gray. Well, thank you all. I'm Chris Gray, the Director of Transportation for WRCOG, and we were here at your last meeting to talk about our interest in doing a detailed look at the corridor and answering some questions on congestion, travel patterns, and the like. And since then, we've been working closely with your staff. I did want to say that the consultant who helped us with this effort, Jason Pack, is here to represent Fair and Peers. And we thought we'd do is this presentation was sent out to all of you, I believe at the end of last week. We'll be going through the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. If we have technical questions, I'll be asking my Mr. Pack to come up, but we'd just like to go ahead and get started. So the purpose of this study is we wanted to take a really deep dive into what's going on in the corridor. And we wanted to look at a lot of different data sources. And WRCOG's interest is primarily in looking at new data, tools, and methodologies that we and you can leverage to answer some of the pressing land use and transportation questions that you have. I want to preface this by saying that we don't build freeways, but we do administer the regional TUMF program. We do fund interchange improvements. And we also have a very strong interest in commuting patterns. We want to know where people are going to, where people are traveling to, because one of our other interests is the larger issue of economic development. So we looked at a bunch of stuff. I'll be really technical here. We looked at things like speed data. We looked at travel data from GPS devices, car navigation systems, cell phones, and then also a database which Caltrans maintains called PEMS. So the key takeaways is the gentleman who just spoke, the congestion's pretty bad. In the southbound and the AM, there's a pretty significant amount of congestion, northbound near the PM, so I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But one of the questions is where are those people coming from? Who's causing the congestion? So then again, there's three takeaways. One, there are long distance trips. There are people driving from Riverside, people driving from Corona, people driving from other areas of the county through the 15. However, there's a large number of people getting on the freeway and getting off in Temecula, which is another reason why we have congestion. And then finally, we are seeing a lot of long distance trips, but they're primarily coming from Temecula and Murrieta. So this map shows you where the congestion is. And as you see, I saw it today driving down here, and you all see this on a daily basis. You have basically from Temecula up to the Y, it's routinely congested, it's regularly congested. We get some very low speeds. But what's very interesting is when we look at the volumes, so PEMS is a database that Caltrans maintains, and they collect data on a daily basis on traffic counts. The optimal capacity of a freeway lane is about 2,000 cars per hour. You have, in theory, 4 lanes of traffic, so you should be able to accommodate 7,000 to 8,000 cars. However, we're seeing no more than 6,000 in a peak hour, which means because of the congestion, there's something keeping people from going through the corridor. And so again, this just shows you the congestion. The red, basically red is bad. For anyone who wants to study congestion, a good source, by the way, is Google Maps, which uses the same data. You can pull up a Google map and get the same data. But we wanted to take a deeper dive into that So we looked at another data vendor, which was able to provide us travel data, and we collected data for all of 2017. So it's not a day, it's not a week, it's an entire year. And we asked them to summarize data for a Monday through Thursday period. So in terms of the data, this is a very robust data set that has millions, hundreds of millions of data points, because every time your GPS, your car GPS or your cell phone GPS or your truck GPS is checking in with a satellite, it's pinging, it's recording that data, and there's a third-party company that's buying all that data and then selling it back to us. So it is a sample. It's not a 100% sample of everyone, because not everyone has a cell phone, not everyone's car has a GPS, but it's a very robust and statistically valid sample. So we looked at the trip data in two ways. One, we looked at some defined points along the corridor, primarily along the 15, and then we looked at some what we called zones. So we grouped this area into 17 zones. So there's the various cities along the corridor, as well as we grouped them into larger areas. So we thought it was important to look at a couple of samples that are right on the 15. So this is 15, we're calling this 15 north, and then 15 south of the county boundary. We also did look at Paula Road in Winchester, but primarily we're going to talk about what we found along the freeways. So this chart says for this point here, which is south of the county line, where the car's coming from. Well, primarily, they're coming from Temecula and Murrieta, but they're also coming, there's a significant number coming from Riverside, which means those are people who are driving from the Riverside area every day. And by the way, once they get to this point here, they're going to somewhere either in San Diego County or San Diego, so San Marcos, Carlsbad. And when we looked at this segment here, by the way, I'll talk about this later, we found some folks who had average trip lengths of over 100 miles. So there's some very long distance trips occurring. Yes? Yes, correct, you're correct, I'm sorry, okay, thank you, Greg. So the same for the morning, same for this dot, which is on the 15 at the Temecula-Murrieta boundary. There are trips coming from everywhere. They're coming from some Temecula, some from Wildomar, but primarily Murrieta. So we're seeing a large number of folks from Murrieta who we're finding on that Temecula-Murrieta boundary. So this chart illustrates a rough breakout of where the trips are coming from by the various locations. And what we find, for example, on the I-15 through Temecula, a lot of the trips are coming from Temecula-Murrieta. Now, we have data for all the zones, for all the areas, but we're going to highlight some of the key locations along the corridor. And so, for example, in the case of Temecula, in general, about 2/3, almost 70% of all the trips that are occurring in the city, which is every time a car moves, are staying in the city. The rest are, of that 30%, a great many of them are actually going to the north. So they're traveling up here during the PM. And there are some folks, but there's a significant number coming from the south. In the case of Murrieta, in terms of trips going to Murrieta in the PM, there's a high number of them which are coming from Temecula, some coming from San Diego. In the case of Menifee, you start to see folks who are coming from areas north of Menifee to Menifee, but also folks coming from Temecula. Wildomar, we start to see the same circumstance. And then when you get to Lake Elsinore, we find an almost equal split in terms of folks who are going to the north, folks who are starting north of Lake Elsinore, and during the PM, they're driving to Lake Elsinore. But what the second column is, it goes back to the 15 through Temecula. A great many of them are coming to and from Temecula. So one of the other data points we wanted to look at is, what are these people doing? What kind of trips are they taking? So this chart shows residential commercial, so that's someone from their house driving to a job, driving to shop, commercial to residential, That's the converse. There's also commercial trips. So we're finding people are using the 15 for a lot of reasons. They're going shopping, they're going to work, other items like that. But what we really wanted to highlight is trip length. So this yellow bar is the longest trip length we recorded, which is 50 miles. Some trips are a lot longer than that. So regardless of the time of day, regardless of is it northbound, southbound, there's a significant number of people who are making these long distance trips. However, the blue line at the bottom shows that there are some local trips using the freeway. So even during the worst of the peak hours, when traffic is really congested, there are some people traveling, along the freeway, using it for local trips. And the reason why that's important is when we look at the data, we're finding congestion. We agree that the congestion has been well validated, but the road's not over capacity. So there's something going on with the operations of the roadway. So what that suggests is there's a tremendous amount of traffic that is getting off the freeway, getting on the freeway, which creates friction. Some of those trips are one-way trips, so a person from, let's say, like Elsinore or Murrieta, driving to Temecula, getting off at Rancho Cal, Winchester, another street. But there's also folks that are making local trips, which means they're using the freeway to go up one or two exits, and there's a small percentage of them, but they're still doing that. But by doing that, they're creating friction because they have to get on the freeway, they merge in the traffic, and they get off. But with that being said, there are folks who are taking some very long trips on the freeway. They are coming from all over the county. They are driving through Temecula. They're driving through the freeway, and some of them are getting off the freeway, but there's a great many of them are going to San Diego. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I did want to say that we also did an analysis for the AM, which has a lot of the same conclusions. If anyone wants me to go through that, I'm happy to do that, but essentially everything that I've said for the PM is basically true for the AM as well.
All right, Mr. Nagar.
Chris, thank you. Something's puzzling. It's hard to believe that somebody would want to get on the freeway. And that makes me question that data because it just doesn't seem logical. Well, how would you respond to that?
Well, let me ask the consultant who's worked with this data before to respond to that question.
Yeah, so I think the big thing to keep in mind here is that this data is what exists. So if there is a cell phone in somebody's car that goes through that point on the freeway and they have location services enabled, we're tracking them or a GPS unit in their car. So what we are seeing is there are some portion, it's not a large portion, it's about 10% of the total trips through that are trips of less than 10 miles. So if you think about it, and I'll give an example. So I live up by Lake Matthews, so I come down here, belong to wine clubs here in Temecula, so I'm down through this corridor a fair amount, especially when I go to our San Diego office. There are times and trips where I will stop at a client's office. I've got a client in Menifee, where I'll stop off the freeway in Menifee, drop something off, pick something up, or Lake Elsinore, and then I'll come through and then I'll stop in Temecula to fill up with gas and then continue down to San Diego. So that is a trip. My trip from Menifee to Temecula to stop for gas on the way down would be recorded as less than 10 miles because it's an individual trip that occurs here with 2 trip stops at the end. So that would be recorded as a trip in this specific corridor. So that's just a personal example that I can give. My guess is that there are people that, for whatever reason, maybe it takes them longer to get across the freeway. Maybe there's other reasons and other factors that affect their choice in travel patterns. But that's what we're seeing with the data, is that there are some people that are doing that.
That's a good explanation. 2 other things. You should clarify something. You're talking about trips less than 10 miles. What I want to make sure we're not talking about is somebody gets on at Pechanga Parkway and drives north and gets off at Rancho California Road or Winchester. That would be a 2-mile trip or a 2.5-mile trip. I'm curious to see if that is occurring. Now, if you're saying that a 8-mile trip, a 10-mile trip is occurring, that does bring Murrieta and maybe parts of Menifee. I don't know if Lake Elsinore extends that far from the Y down
So-
to 15, almost.
Yeah, so let me clarify what's defined as a trip. They know when your cell phone starts a trip because it's moving, and then they have algorithms to figure out when it stops, which means the car physically stops and is there for a certain amount of time. Exactly, I can't tell you exactly what they determine, but in that particular instance, a person, let's say, coming up to 15, getting off on a, let's say, Rancho Cal, and then they sort of, quote, cut through a Temecula street and then go to their final destination. The trip is defined as when the car starts moving and when, I'm sorry, not even the car, either the GPS device or the cell phone starts moving and stops moving. So it will not count as a trip, you getting off on a street, you taking a diversion or anything like that. They're people starting and stopping. And then they also have algorithms where they match up where the trip starts and stops with the land uses they know that are there. So they're able to say, oh, you started that trip at an office park, so that's a commercial trip. You are stopping at a grocery store, that is a commercial trip. So they're able to intuit the trip purpose by looking at the land uses, which is really creepy. They also look at houses the same way. So they know it's a commercial to residential trip because they know when it stops, they say, oh, that's a house. So, Mayor Ingram?
Thank you. On the commercial to commercial, I'm curious. The other day, I took a trip to San Diego with my grandkids and driving along the freeway. I gave them a penny to count each diesel truck that they saw, so I'm sure our demology was cheaper than this. So when we were all said and done, on the trip to San Diego, which took 2.5 hours with traffic, we counted 479 diesels that were in those two far right lanes. And I think there's where we're really showing a substantial impact on friction. And quite frankly, it was shocking. It was even more on the way back. So, and it starts way deep into San Diego County because it starts backing up from the truck stop where we have the border check there, and it backs up. Then when they're getting back on, it backs it up even further. And so, I mean, it was quite a few vehicles. You know, if we have 277,000 cars a day passing through that corridor, how many of them are commercial vehicles? Do we have any idea?
I know that's actually something Caltrans counts. I don't know that off the top of my head, but we can certainly find that out for you.
Okay, thank you.
We come from Canyon Lake, which is Lake Elsinore on I-15. And I appreciate the good work that council member and RCTC Commissioner Bob McKee has done on this subject. But I find it interesting when I read this report beforehand. I came here tonight, and I was surprised that the north and the south had any difference. I mean, when you go north to Corona, or you go south to San Diego through Temecula, the amount of traffic is not that much different. And it's a pain to have to go through that day after day. And it's time to finally do something to get this issue addressed. And I hope the RCTC and I hope this task force is going to really address and make it a big issue. Thank you.
More question, maybe you can answer this. Tourism trips. Does the shorter trips, allocate that maybe tourists don't know how to navigate around town? So for instance, they may be enjoying the Pechanga Resort and decide they want to go to the Promenade Mall. They get on the freeway, or vice versa, or they're visiting the wine country and they say, okay, let's head to the resort now. And they may not know how to take surface streets, so what do? They Rancho California Road, they get on the freeway and go down a mile and get off. Does that factored in or factored out?
A trip is a trip. It doesn't care who's making the trip, because one of the limitations on big data is the data is anonymized. The reason why the companies are willing to sell it, primarily it's the cell phone companies, the GPS companies, the commercial truck providers. They sell the data under the condition that they don't know who the trip is being made. So there's a lot of privacy restrictions, and surprisingly, they take that issue. So they don't know what that issue is. But I can share with everyone, we have done a separate analysis on tourism trips, particularly trips going out to the wine country, and found that the wine country has a very large catchment area in terms of it's pulling people from really all over Southern California, primarily Orange County, LA, other portions of Riverside. So this particular data set didn't zero in on the tourism trips, but we have done a separate analysis for something else to look at the tourism trips.
So just out of curiosity, in this survey, did you take a look at any time on the data if it showed where people were going from the 15 and then cutting back across to get over to the 215? I was sitting at the Golden Triangle the other day, and I was watching people actually get off, cut across, and then come back to the 215 and get on it and travel northbound. And they were traveling southbound on the 15. And when I say a lot, I mean quite a few. So I imagine that everybody's kind of figured out that they don't want to deal with surface traffic, and that's probably why the flyover should have been built years ago. But now they're utilizing Marietta Hot Springs to cut across to do so.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we looked at, I don't believe with Jason we looked at that issue in detail. There's any number of detailed questions one could look at. You could look at, the different routes. The data and the methodology that we've, shared with you could be applied to a particular off-ramp or the flyover or the various connections. But what we did notice is that once you get past the Y, things seem to work themselves out. We don't see the congestion on some of the surface streets, but it's going to and from the Y. It's pretty bad. And that's what all the data is showing. That's what all the analysis is showing. Mr. Ciardo.
Okay, so the data has kind of shown us what the issue is.
Yep.
It's not the number of lanes on the freeway. It's the configuration of the ingress and egress from the freeway that's causing friction. So how do we fix that?
Well, I believe Mr. Thomas has asked our friends at ask your friends at Caltrans to come and talk about that. My experience has been on similar issues is that it's really important to understand what's backing up and why it's backing up. So for example, I've seen a left turn lane on a surface street back up another surface street, which then causes the off-ramp to back up, and that off-ramp backs up onto the freeway. And these are transportation networks that are all interconnected. And if I were you, I think it's important to really dig into the failure points to find out why those roads are failing. Mayor Ingram, your question on trucks is very well taken. That's a key issue, and there are some throughout our entire region, all of Southern California, some of our worst choke points are from trucks. So I would understand, is it the commercial traffic? Is it a particular ramp? But what we're seeing is the traffic from the off-ramps are backing up, and you're basically losing lanes on the freeway. Mayor Ingram's point again is when you've got a whole bunch of trucks in a lane, it's not really a travel lane anymore. So instead of the 4 lanes, it's almost like you have 2.5.
One of the issues that I've noticed if we're traveling northbound is that I see whether it's Waste Management, CR&R, heavy loaded vehicles that are taking the grades, the same going southbound, are the ones that really start to slow it down because you get backed up. And that's where I started looking at the weigh station going, wow, they're needing to start rolling to hit that grade. And they have to build up that momentum, and they just don't have the power that it takes. So, and that's, you can see it at 79 too, when the commercial traffic is getting on right into the Y there, where we have those 3 lanes that all merge. It really becomes an issue, and it starts to back up. It blocks everything as far back as you can see.
So to that point, I've seen other situations. I used to be a traffic consultant in the firm I used to be with Fair and Piers, and we worked on a project in Northern California where it was the way stations. There was the 680 in the Fairfield had a way station right in the middle of this giant interchange, and they ended up moving the way station because that was causing a lot of the backup. So the advantage to taking a really deep dive into a couple of these choke points, because now you now know where the congestion is. You already did. Now you know for sure. You know where the priority is. I believe your resources would be well spent really diving into the congestion on those locations, figuring out why they are and what's under your control and what's not. Whether it's the commercial vehicles, whether it's the off-ramps backing up, whether it's the side streets, whether it's signal timing, because there's usually near-term fixes for those problems, and sometimes they're widening an off-ramp, sometimes they're a way station again, sometimes they're signage. So one of the projects I worked on as a consultant was Walt Disney World in Orlando. They would find really bad congestion at an off-ramp, so they changed their signage. So to Mr. Nagar's point, if you have tourists, so some of those short distance trips might be tourists. Well, if you look into signage and wayfinding, you can figure out who's really taking those trips. And I would say the long-term solution might be adding a lane on the freeway, but in the interim, if you did a deep dive and looked at a couple of these, took a really detailed look at these, where some of these off-ramps are backing up, those kinds of improvements are ones you can potentially do in the near term. You don't have to, fight with SCAG or some of these other agencies to get them funded. Some of them are directly under your control. And if you find out, for example, it's your traffic at your surface streets backing up to the off-ramps, those surface streets are 100% under your jurisdiction. Those traffic signals, those turn lanes, those kinds of improvements. That would be my suggestion for something I would have. I wouldn't say you should stop looking at adding a lane. I think that's an important regional goal because of all the regional traffic that we're finding. But I would suggest taking a really deep dive into why some of that congestion is occurring and are there immediate fixes for that.
What would be the cost associated with doing that really big deep dive?
Well, to put it in comparison, we spent $50,000 on this.
Okay.
I would just guess as a former consultant, something like that might be 200, 500,000, something in that regard. I would say that for those of you who aren't aware, that RCTC is currently looking at a freeway logistics fee, and as part of that study, they have been looking at near-term freeway improvements that can mitigate some of the freeway congestion that's occurring because of trucks. Their consultant has spent quite a bit of time looking at freeway congestion and are there aux lanes, are there off-ramp improvements? So I think between what RCTC's already done and then there's quite a bit of work that Caltrans has done. So I think if you were to first coordinate with those two agencies, you may not have to basically reinvent the wheel.
Just one other question, because I don't want to hog the mic all night, but one of the things I noticed was the trucks that had the ability, that had lighter loads or weren't pulling stuff in their trailers, actually were going around the other trucks substantially. And you might correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't they restricted to the first two right lanes when they're driving these vehicles? Wouldn't that be more of an enforcement issue?
Yeah, that's actually something that came up in the pass area.
Okay.
One of our WCOG board members asked us to check into that, and it's my understanding that that's I think depending on the signage, but that's primarily a enforcement issue with CHP.
So that's something, Mr. Chairman, that maybe we should have CHP at our next meeting to ask about that.
Sure. Okay. Any others? Pat?
Well, is this on? Can you hear me?
No, and don't make that loud noise again, Patrick.
I'm just gonna yell out here. No, it sounds like it is on. Like Chris mentioned, we did have a conference call with Caltrans, and I know Tom is here too, and he can add to this, but we asked the district staff what type of operational improvements that they may have planned for the corridor, and we've asked them to come and make that presentation to you at your next meeting in June, so you can look forward to that. And then I also wanted to mention the gentleman the public speaker earlier, his a comment or question about adding that lane northbound between Winchester and the 215. That is actually part of the plans for the French Valley Interchange Phase 2 project. And we are moving forward with that. We believe we have the funding for it, assuming the STIP money is still available as we get closer. And our plans are, we're in design on that. We're moving forward. Our plans are to complete design on that in 2019 and be under construction in 2020. So that's where we stand on that project.
All right, any others? All right, we have one public comment on that from Tom again. If you wouldn't mind, yeah, jumping up. Thank you.
Okay, again, just as a citizen, one of the comments was about, using the I-15 to jump on and off the freeway. Well, I guess I'm guilty of that myself. And why is that? Well, as an example, when I used to drive from 79 South or Temecula Parkway, whatever you call it, I would get on the freeway and go up and usually get off at Winchester Road. And why is that? Because, we all know that, everything is so backed up there. Well, it's because Inez Road in Temecula is even worse. It's a one-lane road in each direction, and it's horrendous. I don't understand why the city of Temecula doesn't expand that road to make it 2 lanes at least. Okay, so that was one of the comments. The other question that I had, though, was, for the previous gentleman, one of the first slides you had, it showed the data from Monday through Thursday. Did I miss it? Was that correct? Anybody catch that? It was aggregate. Monday through, what happened to Friday? Friday is the worst. Why didn't you include Friday is my question. Thank you.
Yeah, so typically we don't include Fridays in any assessment because it does include irregular trips. And a lot of times I try and explain this as the Christmas Eve phenomenon. Like, we tend to not design our parking lots or our roads around our retail malls and stuff to accommodate the 1 hour on Christmas Eve before Christmas to accommodate the traffic. So same goes here, where we have sparse dollars to spend on transportation. So you want to make sure you get the most bang for your buck, which is typically during your typical weekdays, and try and not over design it for the other times of the week by accounting for Friday travel.
Okay, I guess I'll buy that one, but Fridays are horrendous. They are, and quite frankly, Sundays are not very good either, with people commuting out of San Diego and into San Diego. So if I were to take the information that you provided with the demology that we have here, would I be able to go and take those days and calculate them in, just predicated on Monday through Thursday, and go, that's the additional load count that's there?
So
because the traffic doesn't disappear because it's Friday.
No, I understand that.
And
So
It gets more, so you're getting a skewed idea of what normal is.
So, but what I'm saying is, why don't we take what's normal on Thursday and apply that to Friday?
yeah, I mean, the question is really, what are you designing for? What's the condition you're trying to mitigate for? Is it Monday through Thursday, 4 to 6 p.m.? Is it Friday at 5 p.m.? Is it Saturday? Is it the wine festival, the balloon festival? So it's, the question really is, what are you trying to solve for? And the typical transportation approach has always been to solve for the typical PM peak hour during a non-vacation time on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. AM and PM peak hour, but If you truly wanted to understand what the Friday conditions were, you could simply replicate the analysis and just do it for a Friday, but then you would really be designing for that Friday afternoon, and it's really a choice you would have to make.
Matt, I have a comment.
Yeah.
This has come up in years past, and it involves, your A, B, C, D, and E intersections. Do you build an intersection that is 15 lanes wide because one day or 2 days a week you have a peak travel hour for 2 hours? You don't, because you can't afford it. And the rest of the time it would be a waste. So I think that's the whole idea behind this. You don't plan for the peak, you plan for the normal, with a little bit of room for a peak, some wiggle room, but we can't afford to do a 15-lane highway to plan for the Friday afternoon going to the wine festival. So that's the explanation that I've heard in the past, and I think it rings true here.
But I would just say it's really, these are the kinds of questions you can ask now. And so one of the great things about big data is if you really want to know what it's like on the Friday, you want to plan for the Friday on a wine festival or balloon festival, you could collect the data for that day.
I've never attended the wine
Yeah.
festival on a Friday, and generally I work on Fridays.
Right.
So I think the vast majority of the people that are commuting from our communities work on Fridays.
Right. So if you wanted to, plan for a typical Friday throughout the year, the data sets are robust enough so you could extract the data for those periods.
It sounds like we're not consuming what we have anyhow, so I don't know that data would really skew it that much. The concern is, as the region grows, for me, is how do we get to a point where we can maintain the traffic loads? If we're not utilizing it all now, there's that much friction, what's it gonna be like in 2 to 5 years?
Well, that's why my suggestion would be to consider improvements to the freeway as a long-term strategy, because Temecula is going to continue to grow, San Diego, our region is going to continue to grow. And whether that's a mixed flow lane, a travel lane, a toll lane, I think that would be determinable. But I think it's important for you to provide some near-term relief to your residents, and so that's why I would recommend this, deep dive in a couple of these choke points to really see, is there anything you can do in the near term.
And I would urge a little bit of caution too, because, I appreciate the study that was done, but this is, preliminary, right? I mean, we do need a deep dive, we do need a better understanding of that, and we need to be able to articulate really clear questions that we want to ask. At this point, what we have is, sort of a good, higher level view of where traffic is and what the issues are. I think there are some short-term solutions, but it's not to ignore. I mean, the whole reason we brought this together in the first place is, our prior meetings with RCTC and others said that the long-term solution of adding lanes is, 15 to 30 years out. And we know that that's just not a reasonable solution. And so, recognizing that it's going to take us some time to get that momentum and get things on the projects list and, identify funding and resources for it. I'd say our approach is, I really like the suggestion. I think we do need a deep dive into the data, understand what the constraints really are and what the opportunities might be to help alleviate that. And maybe it does mean working closer with folks at border checkpoint station and the way station, all of that, and maybe more education within our own communities and, and so forth, timing of, traffic signals, I mean, the whole 9 yards, and start to chip away at this and see where we get the biggest gains and the biggest bang for our buck, while still maintaining an eye toward that, long-term solution like you were talking about. So, so I would just urge a little bit of caution. Let's not jump to any conclusions just yet. This is just our first peel back of a really large onion here. Pat?
Just to add to the gentleman who asked about the other roads in Temecula, we do have a project being planned now to widen Inez Road from Rancho Vista down to La Paz, so adding capacity to the eastern side there on Inez. And then the western bypass project, the Altair project, was approved to build part of that up to Diaz, or up to Rancho Cal at Diaz, and then the city is starting now to work on widening Diaz north of Rancho Cal as well. So we are working on some of those alternate routes through Temecula.
All right. Any others on this WRCOG study? No?
Thank you for a very thorough study.
Yep, thank you so much. All right, so moving on in the agenda, we've got Caltrans update. Yeah, just from here is fine, yeah. Thank you.
So, good evening. My name's Tom Ainsworth. I'm over Intelligent Transportation Systems for Caltrans District 8. Our director will be out here in June to discuss the corridor. He's going to talk about Caltrans' role in transportation. We kind of changed to a maintenance and operations organization, and we don't add capacity so much anymore. He's going to talk about existing and future traffic volumes for the corridor. He's going to talk about, to kind of segue what WRCOG said, the operational improvements, what kind of operational issues we see on this segment. And what, and maybe you guys will talk about the existing, there's a lot of existing projects in the queue right now that are going to solve some of those operational improvements. We're also going to talk about what else can be done, what we think can be done to rectify those operational issues. He's also here to listen, to get a good idea. I think I really enjoyed the presentation from WRCOG. I think what they said about the operational issues and what, taking a big deep dive into what can be done, I think there can be some things done. There's so many people entering, as you said, entering and exiting the freeway in that short segment. It just is causing a lot of turbulence. And the volumes, I think he showed a volume of 6,000 or something on that segment, but it actually changes quite a bit from one end to the other. So we'll talk about all that stuff. He's mainly going to talk about the segment between the I-15 and 215 to into San Diego. If you do have other kind of operational issues outside of that segment, you can come talk to me afterwards, and maybe we can add something to the presentation, or we can take a look at that. With that, it's a pleasure to be on the task force, and he's really looking forward to coming out here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. My colleague, Mr. Miller, told me not to be dramatic today, so I'm gonna keep it short. Mr. Ainsworth, you talked about the role of Caltrans changing over years, going to a maintenance and operations role. The primary choke point that we see with your operation is your permit review and approval process. That's where you could help us. If WRCOG, RCTC, and all of the Southwest cities are speaking with one voice, moving in one direction, we could use your help in moving those plans out so that we can get to construction quicker and quicker. There is no reason why the I-15 Railroad Canyon Road interchange took 17 years and 4 months to get a PSR approved. We can't have those kind of delays like we had at Gunnarsson and Highway 74, where we tried to correct a problem where a 9-year-old girl died. 3 more people have died since. We're finally moving on that, but it was the funnel point of Caltrans' permit review process. So we need your help in changing that and expediting those approvals. Thank you.
Mr. Nicart.
It's interesting you should bring that up, and I'll piggyback a little bit on that, because when we ran into those same challenges, we figured, well, we're willing to pay for contract planning. And we were told that would run against union issues with Caltrans. And so that's what we were told. And so here we were just told that the review period, which I don't remember what it was, it took close, and I don't even remember the project. I think it was French Valley Parkway, and it took almost 2 years. And we were just told, that's just the way it is. It's how it was, and we were willing to pay for our own planner to do it. But anyway, so maybe you can ask the director to along with what Mr. McGee said, also address that as well. Don't necessarily want to bombard you, but that's kind of an issue.
No, it's fine. There's been an effort to improve the permit process, by the way, and there's a 30-day goal to get a permit out now. That's been within the last couple of years. So, if Transportation projects take a long time. I'm frustrated too. I have my own projects we push through, and I'm as frustrated as you with a lot of those things. But I can have our director kind of talk to that, or maybe you guys can ask him some questions about that.
I think it's important to note that since Mr. Belinsky has come on board, we have noticed a huge change, and that it is different. And so if he continues to move that ball forward and that momentum and pendulum keeps going, we're in a good place. But I'm cautiously optimistic. So please send that message to Mr. Belinsky.
Will do.
I was just gonna say anecdotally, I think it was the French Valley Parkway, the first phase that we did, which was about, 6, 7 years ago, something like that. And it took years and years to get to that point. But when we finally cleared Caltrans and the Federal Highways Commission for California had to go to Washington DC, where it sat on the head who had to sign off on it. And it sat there for 8 months. All they had to do was just sign it. Till finally we called Terrell Ice's office. That didn't help, and eventually Congressman Ice at the time, as our congressman, just went over there, knocked on the door, and said, "Would you please sign this?" That's exactly what occurred, and then we were set free. There's just the bureaucracy of it all is so unnecessary. And it's just anecdotal. It's not necessarily apply here, but just bureaucracy in general. We need to bust through it.
All right, any others? All right.
You guys did a good job for Myriad. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, we appreciate that.
All right, and we have one public speaker on this. Let's see, Bruce Colbert.
Hi, I'm Bruce Colbert. I'm director of the Property Owners Association of Riverside County. And I think this whole task force is wonderful for defining the problem and at least proposing solutions. As far as Caltrans' ability to actually build capacity, that would be a next step after at least defining what kind of project might be needed. So this is still wonderful work that's being done. Just like you might find benefit from using the studies from RCTC and Caltrans, you might also find that Orange County resolved a similar congestion problem with their El Toro Y. So it might be worth contacting our OCTA just to see if they have any transferable lessons learned that you might be able to apply here at our Y. So, and then as far as adding additional capacity, the Y project and also the Harbor Freeway project, they show what can be done with when you have a constricted right-of-way, if that might be of any use. So. And it's interesting with the friction, what I heard was that friction's a problem, but it causes an effective loss of a lane. So is it a lane problem or a friction problem? Maybe a little of both. So again, I really appreciate all that's being done. Thank you very much. Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? All right. So then our next agenda item is guiding principles for discussion, and specifically referencing federal lobbyist activities. And Betsy's going to help with some of the slides on this. At our last task force meeting, we talked a little bit about the opportunities, I think, for bringing on a federal lobbyist. And so I know, John, you had reached out to the folks that you know, and we had reached out to the folks that we know, and same ones for Lake Elsinore. The need is clear, but it might be a little premature to be having that conversation. And I think that's something maybe we could all agree on here. We need a strategy, we need priorities, we need a clearly defined scope, and we need sort of unity in that messaging. And then we need to talk about strategy, what makes the most sense. Part of the conversation I've been having with folks is that some of our cities, we already have our own federal lobbyists. We tend to work well with them. They tend to represent us well on a lot of these important issues. Do we need to find somebody specific to transportation that might have a different type of reach or different access or different strategy? Those are all things that we need to address soon. being able to develop sort of these guiding principles, I think, is our first sort of step. The recommendation that came out of Church and Associates is not unlike the conversation that John, you and I had the other day, which is, create that unity on a project plan, help define this. And we have to agree, right? Because if we're coming in with different messaging or different priorities or different opportunities, and that's something I think we said on the first day is, the whole strategy tends to fail. We need to do this sooner than later, because while I think, and I appreciate what WRCOG said earlier about some, near and short-term solutions on all this, start looking at it. Again, the longer we wait on getting our act together, the longer we're pushing out that date of doing any of the long-term infrastructure upgrades that might need to occur. So sooner the better on this. The third point is how to best move forward as a regional entity and make sure that we're inviting a lot of folks. We just got an email, Betsy, I think it was today or yesterday, mentioning that we needed to make sure that Bill Horn out of San Diego and the district office there is included, in this conversation. And yeah, absolutely, right? Every time we have one of these meetings, more folks are brought to the table, and we're definitely not trying to keep anybody from the table. We want as many folks here as possible and make sure we get a good consensus. One of the folks that I think we definitely need to reach out to and who I have a bit of a relationship is the Western Truckers Association. This is going to be a reoccurring theme in our conversations on the goods movement. It's certainly in their best interest to keep goods moving and make it efficient, and it's in ours as well. So, we need to make sure that we're reaching out to as many folks, and as these ideas come up, we keep that running list and make sure we are as inclusive as possible. And then, last part, of course, is making sure the public is involved and, we're as open and transparent, and these meetings are really going to help with that. I know there's a lot that's going on in the background in between these meetings to keep things moving forward, but the more we can do this, and we had an outstanding attendance by the public today. It's 4, but really, hey, I appreciate everybody being here. It's important, and I know everybody's busy, and doing meetings like this on a weekday afternoon is difficult for a lot of folks. Part of our responsibility, I think, as a city and all of us collectively too, is make sure that when we are doing these meetings, we notice them on our own, social media or websites or whatever it is, our own mail lists, and make sure our own communities know what we're doing. And at a minimum, also just make sure we're continuing to update them as progress is made and we start to see some real effect here. Moving on here, on the guiding principles, these are just a stab at it, right? This isn't set in stone or anything, but their recommendations first was identify a core problem, and it could be something as simple as infrastructure is just, undersized, right? Just identify the core problem and what we're trying to work toward. Establish the clear objectives, and that means, at some point very soon, we need to establish the extent of the boundaries that we're talking about encompassing under this program, because we can't be everything to everyone. So we have to be careful with that. And the larger this gets, the more diluted that message gets, right? So we need to be careful and cognizant of those issues. And I think that's a goal that we need to work on collectively as a task force. And again, sooner rather than later. I think we need to have that defined, ideally by our next meeting, if not the one after that. Number 7 there is, use of transportation project data and analysis, and using the big data and designing each segment and being able to do that. And I think, WRCOG, you mentioned this earlier today, was, we need a deep dive on the information, but we need to be able to define what those specific questions are. And we're going to, I think, lean heavily on you folks and Caltrans and others in helping us decide what those specific questions are. John, I think you had some great points. Mike, Bob, Kelly, everybody's, chiming in. We've got some ideas of what we think the problems are based on our own, observations, but we're really going to be relying on that technical expertise as well to help carry this forward. and make the recommendations of what it is we need to focus on. And then lastly, it's develop a strategy for local, state, federal support on all of this, right? We need to we're still moving forward, working on making sure the project is actually, becomes a project and is on folks' lists. I mean, that's an important first step here. But then, beyond all of that, it's really making sure that we keep in constant communication with our state and federal partners. And now more than ever, right? I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a bit of a split between our state and the federal government going on right now. And the nice thing is I feel like transportation is a bit of a neutral territory, right? Everybody can kind of agree that something needs to be done regardless of politics. And so making sure that we continue our messaging with our representatives and the folks that sit on these committees. And I know, I think Congressman Calvert's frankly probably getting tired of seeing me. I'll be back there in the first week of May again. but we're gonna keep carrying that message forward every time we can. And just so folks, remember who we are and what our concerns are. And I think collectively, we've all talked about doing, joint trips and all of that, but, we're all out there for a variety of reasons, either Sacramento or DC. And just having that as part of that portfolio of items that we're going to talk about and just keep that, on the front burner for folks, I think is incredibly important. And then lastly is, if we decide to do this collectively, we need to make a decision of, what type of lobbying focus we have. I know even the tribe has their own expert lobbyists at both the federal and state level. And so the question then becomes, do we combine efforts and work out of one office, or is it best to have, multiple touches from a variety of different perspectives and expertise? And again, that's something that it's not, super urgent right now, but it will become very urgent once we start to develop a plan and have some focus on what our objectives are. So you've got the slides. That's kind of where we're at with this, and happy to continue the conversation here. John?
So when the omnibus came out, we all sat and kind of take a look at it, and I had gotten a hold of Kadish, and we have our own lobbyist as well. I think one of the things that we really need to take a look at as a task force is creating a resolution that we all agree is in the best interest of each and every member sitting at the table here. Having 10, 11, 12 different objectives is confusing, and it's not going to be good. And I think we need to stay goal-oriented and laser-focused. And I think what should happen is each member sitting here of the task force should get their input in, and let's get this resolution done so that we're all rowing in the same direction. I think that's imperative, because each one of us wants something a little different. And again, we can't do everything for all. It's just not going to work. But we need to prioritize, whether it's Marietta, whether it's Mr. McGee and Elsinore, and say, okay, these are realistic goals that we can achieve together, united, and then agree on that, and then we don't have to go back and revisit that again. It's out of the way. So I'm kind of looking for some consensus on that from everyone. Yes, as soon as possible.
John, I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that was the gist of when we met at first. Everybody sort of wanted to, get a little piece of the pie for themselves. And excuse me, I certainly, when we talk about these things, I want to avoid argument, but then again, as I hate to coin the term politicians, I guess that's what we do. So let me just start a little bit. Menifee, for instance, just received 2 new lanes on the 215. Tremendous amount of money was spent to do that. Out in Mr. McGee's neck of the woods, we just finished the HOV lanes, and between now and 2029, listening to what Ann Meyer presented at the last meeting, I think $500 million is going to be allocated your way. In fact, RCTC just approved $50 million to start the CEQA studies for those HOV lanes, and that's a 5-year process. What we wouldn't give for that $50 million to apply to the 32 we're hoping to get in STIP to do the French Valley Parkway, Now, personally, I think that'd be money better spent than HOV lanes and a CEQA study right now. But we're not necessarily making a move for that money, okay? That's not where I'm coming from. But where I am coming from is that your piece of the pie is coming. You've gotten it. It's on the books. I think we need to focus on the border to the Y. And I think that helps everybody. And then once we accomplish that, we move on. And that's pretty much kind of where I stand on it, and I definitely want to hear how other people feel. And that's why we started this effort.
I think it's imperative that we make sure that everybody has skin in the game here and that it's benefiting everyone sitting here so that they feel that what they're doing is productive and they're not doing it exclusively for one area. I really do. I think this is one of the reasons I thought we need some type of goal, we need a final outcome, and we all need to agree on what's impacting the region as a whole, because this is a regional issue. Again, I can't emphasize it enough. If I'm sitting 2.5 hours in traffic traveling northbound trying to get back to Marietta, I don't care where the traffic started. I want to fix it because it's impacting my life. And if you're going to Canyon Lake and it's taking you 2 hours and 45 minutes, it's impacting your life. Whether you created it or not, it still impacts all of our constituents' lives. How do we all get on the same track with this and go, let's fix it? And if that means the friction, looking at, it sounds great. I understand what Mr. Ciardo said, don't overbuild it. If we're already at 6,000 and we can get another 2,000, how do we get that additional 2,000 moving? And so that's where I'm at. If there's money marked for RCTC, we already talked about a 2-track plan anyhow. So we're not looking to take anything away from another city that's waited in the queue for 10 or 15 years.
If I may, Mr. Yeah. No. Here, do we need, would we like, I should say, HOV lanes that where they terminate now, just I guess to the northwest of Elsinore? Would we like to have them extended out to Cajalco? Yeah, I use them. I use them all the time, so it works. Does it solve a problem out there? Yeah. Is it, where is the money better well spent? We can have that debate. But I don't necessarily really want to even, go for that pot of money. Where I would say, geez, guys, there's already a pot of money out there that's being spent. If we're going to try to, spend more, then it's now going to take away from this effort. That's troublesome. And again, I'm wanting to have this conversation. I talked a little bit about Menifee. Armando, it's good to see you. Something else I didn't mention was, again, before Menifee became a city, the city of Temecula fought for the Menifee area. I mean, the Clinton-Keith interchange, the Newport Road interchange, and the Scott Road interchange were all a function of a lawsuit settlement between the city of Temecula and the county of Riverside that required formed and funded CFDs to build those interchanges. So we've pulled a lot of weight around here. I think the friction problem is going to be solved in several ways. Number one is, I think Chris made a good point. You can do some things now with signage and communication, but the French Valley Parkway project is a cure for the friction problem.
I would not disagree with that at all.
And I think that's our priority. That is the priority. And if we are successful with French Valley Parkway, and God bless you, you're going to get your HOV lanes. I mean, $50 million to start the CEQA. My gosh, I said we can. I mean, what I wouldn't do to get that and add it to the 32 million STIP that we have coming. It's a little. I mean, we're going to spend 50 on CEQA when we can build a project right now with that $50 million. It's a little hard to swallow, but swallowing it we are. But if we're going to talk about spending more in that direction, then I'd have to object to it.
I would like to interject at some point. So go ahead. Finish.
I'm done.
Okay.
Thanks.
That project is 270 million.
Which one is?
The French Valley.
Yeah,
It's $270 million right now.
And we've broken it up in about 5 phases.
Right. So, number one, I think it's important. This committee right now is at the stage of trying to identify exactly what it is in the short term we're going to do to try to address this, the issues that are here. And we don't even know what those are yet. And I think it's important for us to focus on that so that we can identify those. And then once those are identified, then we can figure out how much it costs, who we need to lobby to get it. I mean, it might not even be federal dollars. So, you know, I don't want to put the cart before the horse, since we're using cliches. I just think we need to take one step at a time and figure out exactly, like they were talking about, doing a deep dive into figuring out exactly why we're having the friction we're having and what solutions there are before we start talking about, you know, the Bob's project up in Lake Elsinore. I'm not going to start picking on other people's stuff when we don't even know what it is that we want to go ask for here. So I don't think anybody's threatening anybody else's project, and I don't think, you know, they're unreasonable for wanting some things taken care of. And but you know, this is a new process. That's 3 months old, and I think we need to make sure that we keep our eye on the ball and don't get don't get too far ahead.
All right, I've got Bob next, and then
If I may, just really quickly, you know what? I apologize, Bob, I'll make it quick. I agree with Mr. Ciardo, and that's the whole premise of let's get a resolution together or some agreement amongst all of us, even from the funding mechanism of the report, if it's gonna be $500,000, and how that's gonna be paid for, and that we all agree, so there's no surprises.
Bob.
Thank you, Mayor Rahm. Three things. On the $50 million, let's be clear. It's environmental CEQA process from Cajalco Road to Highway 74. It doesn't even go halfway through the city of Lake Elsinore. It is not Bob's project, and Bob would spend $50 million somewhere else. Perhaps he'd spend it on one of the 6 interchanges in his city that haven't been built. So when we talk about not taking away from anybody, well, I sit here as the only city who hasn't got an interchange, and we got 6 that need to happen. So I appreciate the partnership with Menifee that Temecula has shared, but nothing's come our way. That needs to occur. Shifting to why we're here today, I'm going to try to stay on topic. Don't get me going, Mike. What I learned here today from Mr. Gray's presentation was we've got zigzaggers, freeway jumpers, and truckers. And we have an opportunity to address some of those things fairly cheaply and soon by checking on our internal trip circulation and whether or not those capacities can be moved forward quicker. Heard from Mr. Thomas today that those plans are already moving forward. That's good news. We can also do some things with signage or lane striping, and then we have the truckers and enforcement. So I think it's very important that we have CHP here because we need to keep them in those 2 lanes, not jumping out and being part of the zigzagging problem. So those things we can do short-term, relatively short-term, because we're still dealing with someone else's piece of real estate. But I also want to talk about the long-term, and if we are looking at expanding capacity, I want to make sure that we learn the lessons from the 91 expansion. It took us 10 years to make that happen. $1.4 billion and 3 different sources of money that we are indebted to now for 40 years. And as soon as we finished it, we saw negative ramifications backing all the way up into the Temescal Valley and even all the way to the city limits of Lake Elsinore. RCTC is now actively engaged in doing some of the things that Mr. Gray talked about with striping and signage and X, Y, and Z. Don't want to make the same mistake. If we spend, God forbid, 10 years to make these changes and then we push that problem somewhere else, well, then we've really not solved the problem. We've shifted it to somebody else. Maybe it becomes Bill Horn's problem, and we don't want to do that. We want to be responsible decision makers and solve this issue. So that's all. Thank you, Mr. Rom.
I just want to say that, other than Menifee, Canyon Lake is probably the only one that doesn't really have a freeway to call its own. So we are not thinking locally, we are thinking regionally, because my constituents all go elsewhere. We don't have a Walmart, we don't have a Kmart, we don't have anything. They have to go somewhere else to get their goods, their movies, everything. That means they have to get out on these roads that are full of truckers and full of zigzaggers and people that are getting on the freeway, discovering it's too congested and getting back off. We've got to start doing something, although I do also share the frustration of Mr. McGee, because we have a commuter issue going north. And I thought last meeting that we had discussed including that in this as a consideration, because there is a domino effect. If you fix one thing, as we saw on 91, just after I stopped commuting, thankfully, it becomes an issue down the road. So if we're only focusing from here to the Y and we're not looking at everything else, I don't think we're doing anybody any favors. And I think all those people that are still moving along these roads are still going to have to find a solution. So how do we how do we add that in? I understand that we need to stay fairly narrow, but we can't be that narrow. We can't be that focused.
Excuse me, a couple of things to address what was said. Mr. Sciardo, I agree with you 100%. Let's maybe back up a second, because my statement and response was to what your colleague said, Mr. Ingram, about having a cohesive message. I think that's extremely important. We're trying to, I guess, establish a message that doesn't reach out and, as Mr. Ingram said, try to go for the moon, because nobody will take us seriously. So in relation to Mr. McGee and what you had mentioned, I get it, and you communicated very well. You're getting an HOV lane, it's not really even yours, okay, but you need interchanges and you're not getting that. If you ever wanted to, I'd lock arms with you and say, let's reallocate that $50 million, let's take 25 right now. Let's go to RCTC and say, give it to Lake Elsinore for the interchange they need, okay? Let's do that. Let's take the other 25 and give it to the French Valley Parkway. I guess, I mean, let's do it. Which is more important? The point I'm saying is, and I don't want anybody to misinterpret, is I don't want to take anything away from your city. I want your city to get what it needs. As it relates to the friction issue, I think once we solve the traffic movement between the county line and the Y, a lot of problems go away. That's, I guess, pretty much my point. So we needed to come up with a statement. That's where we started, and maybe, Betsy, you can put that back up. If you can put up those, yeah, if you can put up those statements, so that if we don't agree today, I mean, we can work on it and everybody can come back with what they, think the goals should be. But I'll tell you, if the goals are all over the place and not concise and focused, I don't think we're going to get the traction that we're hoping to get.
Even with the studies and information, I agree with you. That's what I say. Even if you take this and just modify it to what each city may assume they need or want, even if we don't have all the information, at least we know what they're asking. And we can go, okay, it's not an impact or it is an impact.
So, yeah, and I think that, again, these are just, look, this isn't written for, for us to adopt. It's just a template. We just threw up, concepts up here. I see us needing to, what you said earlier, John, is the resolution. Now, I know, let's be candid. We all brought a resolution back to our own cities. And, in each one of those meetings, the balance of your council looked at this and said, well, this is just something for Temecula. We need to put our piece in it too. And so the resolutions as passed were, 10 different resolutions. And so the choice for us is, again, what I said earlier, do we take those 10 resolutions and try and create one big one? Because then, again, we've diluted our message and we're not, as focused as we need to be on immediate and careful needs.
It's boiled down to the marrow of the problem, and Mr. Nagar is right. If we come up with a basket full of all this stuff that everybody wants, nobody is going to take us serious. And there isn't enough money in Washington or Sacramento, even if we could get our hands on it.
Right.
So, if I may, Mr. Mayor, consider this for a second. We all have a uniqueness, and as we begin to look at this template, maybe it starts with a preamble, and the preamble could talk about Lake Elsinore, and the preamble can talk about Menifee and those things that are unique. And how we package it is that this region, okay, is starting to emerge as an economic powerhouse, an affordable housing enclave, which is, we all know that if there's housing to be had, it's here in Riverside. It's not available in Los Angeles. It's not available in Orange County in any affordable manner. It's here. Okay, we can begin to make those arguments in our preamble and say that our focus is on moving through this area. I have no problem doing that and focusing on everybody's needs. When it comes to, let's say, making a list of priorities, let's agree on those list of priorities. Let's take priority 1 and go for it.
Exactly.
Okay, and then priority 2, and let's go for it. And I will promise you, and I know my colleague will agree, and I know we can speak for our city council, we are just as interested in your success, okay, as we want you to be in ours. And I promise that commitment, absolutely. And what I said is true. You want to go to RCTC, I will fight to have that money reallocated if that's what Elsinore wants to do. You've got my commitment to do that. Thank you, sir. You bet.
All right. So you want to make a motion? No, I mean, look, I like the idea. I think, we can have our folks here sort of put together, exactly what you sort of framed out there, Mike. And then come up with the, priority 1 and so forth. And everybody else, in between now and the next meeting, take your resolution that you passed and come up with your priorities and what makes, your transportation needs in your mind, a salient argument. Just going back to where we were, a meeting or so ago, the WRCOG study was important because I think we all knew that this section of freeway was, the worst, or at least that's what we're being told. And I think we all sort of collectively agreed that, yeah, that's probably right. And we asked WRCOG to come up with that study, and they basically, justified our perceptions on this, right? So now, like I say, I think the two things that really need to happen from here are, us collectively having that resolution. And look, we're going to need you, just like we're going to have to make those same arguments, because we're going to have to go back to our own colleagues and say, okay, everybody else is putting the kitchen sink in this as well. I need you to support this, right? And we're going to need you to be that advocate at your meeting too, and make sure folks understand exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish here. And then the second one is we need that clear sort of guideline from our experts and our own input as well to say what is that next deep dive on the analysis and the information that we need to be able to understand what our short and long-term goals are going to be.
That should be in the first portion of the resolution. So, because I agree with Mr. Ciardo, until we get the information we need, we're just shooting in the dark. Let's get the rest of the data together. But my concern again is if we're going to say, hey, we're going to do this, and we want to make sure that we're protecting each other, we are a juggernaut. We are the Southwest. We comprise almost half the population of Riverside County. Let's stand up and do so.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, because the data issue is very important. That's exactly right, because that's what we're going to stand on. Perhaps between now and our next meeting, this is what we do. Okay, I'll propose this, and maybe it's in the form of a motion. And Betsy, if you can help out by write this down. Every city, go back and prepare your description of your city. Okay, your goals and who you are as a city. The city of Lake Elsinore has emerged as the dream extreme of Riverside County. We have this, we have that, we have that. We attract the number of blah, blah, blah. You see what I'm saying? Start to describe it. We have X jobs. We attract X number of tourism. That's in the preamble. Temecula can do that as well. We can talk about our economic development, the amount of money that our economic development brings in, which is pushing $1 billion. We can talk about you know, what's here, the Pechanga Resort, et cetera, et cetera. Menifee, same thing. Wildemar and Canyon Lake, the same thing. Now you've set the baseline while this area is so important. Then we go into the problem, okay? The next thing that comes up is when you start to establish that between Elsinore, between Temecula, between Menifee, between Marietta, I didn't mean to leave you out in the description.
We heard that you were building a wall and trying to make us pay for it, Mr. McGar.
When you start taking all of, we've painted a picture in that preamble, and you can throw in the preamble that we're the haven for affordable housing. We're the only places where housing construction is literally occurring in a reasonable fashion, unless you want to move to San Bernardino and Victorville and points up north in that regard. When you start to paint that picture and the relationship we have with each other, all of a sudden, put it all together, we're probably pushing economic development and job creation probably to the tune of $2-3 billion a year.
If not more.
If not more.
Because we're the fourth largest county out of 58, and we will be the third.
You got it. And then you throw job information in there as well. Now we've set the baseline for what we're going to ask for.
If I might add, the easy way to do this, rather than doing it in a PowerPoint at this point, because we're going to be adding this, and we're going to be putting this burden on staff, which is going to cost all of us, the simple thing would be to do is put this in Word, set it up for a red line, let us add in what we need to add in, send it back to consolidate it.
Got it. Now, as it relates to the priority list, everybody throw in there for the next meeting what your priorities are, and then we can sit here and decide how we want to put it on the list. And that could also be, again, in our message, in our guiding principles. Therefore, the group has decided that the following priorities are what we need to accomplish, and then we can just all decide what those
I think
are.
there was a big emphasis, and you might correct me if I'm wrong, on everybody that's sitting in here today, and I'll raise my hand, traffic is my number one priority, period. I'm tired of sitting in our corridors all the time. Whether I'm driving 2 miles or whether I'm driving 200 miles shouldn't be relevant. If it's taking me 2 hours to drive 30 miles, we've got a problem.
Right. Yeah, agreed.
And I think we need to really focus on, like Mr. Ciardo said, in regard to, let's get that information as fast as possible. What's it gonna cost? So can we get that to the top of what we're all agreeing on so that we can move forward and get a consensus built on that so that we can put out an RFP or whatever we're gonna do in order to get the numbers on that now, so we're not waiting another 30 days. So that we can at least explore that option. Would that make sense to everyone?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we go about doing that?
Could you say that again? Just say it one more time.
Well, he said it could be anywhere from $50,000 to $500,000 to do this type of survey. So what I'm concerned with is I don't want to sit here and build all this stuff and put it together, then bring it back 30 days from now. Let's get a consensus here that, yes, we agree that that's what we need to do from a standpoint of getting the information while we're building the joint resolution. And let's figure out what that's going to be and how we're going to get an RFP out to accomplish that. Or if we're going to do that through WRCOG and then move forward that way. I think it's more productive.
So we're doing it concurrently.
Right.
Got it, yeah, that makes good sense. And you know what, speaking to myself as well, we need to be careful we don't get caught up in bureaucracy.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And because that's the very thing we're decrying. So I say I like your idea. Concurrently, we can prepare the RFP, okay, because we know we're going to do it. And if everybody's okay with sort of the structure I mentioned, I'll make it in the form of a motion, or I don't need to be redundant, but unless anybody has any trouble
I don't have
with
an
it.
issue with it.
No.
Okay, then Betsy, are you?
No. Yeah, we don't do that.
Let's have Mr. Ingram address that.
The traffic study is paramount. It's the first portion to move this forward. We're all saying, look, we need to have this data in order to address the issues. Meanwhile, we can look at what our individual needs are. But if we know that we have a friction issue and the other things going on, let's address what that's going to cost us to get that study back as soon as possible and get everybody to agree on what we can afford.
Well, I
Because
think,
otherwise, we're just wasting our time.
and I think we're gonna rely on our public works folks and those at WRCOG to help define that.
Yeah, we can certainly work with WRCOG on trying to frame up a scope of work for doing those additional studies.
And then sort of an estimate maybe of what you think that might run. Bob?
As long as we're staying within guiding principles 5, 6, and 7, I'm good.
Okay. Anybody else?
So, do I need to be redundant with?
No, I mean, we don't do motions and all that here. We're not that formal. Just a quick thumbs up and we'll move on.
Just for clarification, so when you are developing your priorities, are you developing priorities that are specific to I-15? Or are we developing priorities that are,
We
you know,
won't
so
know.
given the task force is I-15?
We won't know what those priorities are until we identify them with the larger study. What we're saying now is let's take this, what we have, the guiding principles, turn those into a red line, put them in Word form. Let's get them off to our city, to our staff, people like Mr. Hitch, Mr. Mailing. Let them put their input in for the city, the same for Temecula, Menifee, the rest. They could be working that on in the background, in the peripheral, while we're looking at what the cost of this study is going to be. So when it comes back that we have data that substantiates what we're working on, that we're not wasting our time.
And Betsy, if I may, there'll be a preamble.
Yes.
The preamble should address the uniqueness of each city, and each city can weigh in on that. The economic development strategy for each city, the job creation in each city, the uniqueness of each city.
Well, let's and expand it a little bit more, because we have to include the perspectives of our counties, both San Diego, Riverside, and our tribal partners as well. Yeah.
That's exactly perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Exactly. Exactly. When you talk about the Pechanga Nation and the Pechanga Resort, absolutely. So you see where we're going with the preamble, and then once we, everybody through the red line that Mr. Ingram talked about, we can tweak that. That should be ready by the next meeting. And then the RFP, or what it's going to cost to get the data, once we can agree what it's going to cost to get the data, we can identify the funding source. Okay, and when we started this effort, we told everybody there was going to be a cost. So everybody's going to have to participate. And so we're just telling that ahead of time. Once we go out and get the data, then, you know what, prioritization should become pretty clear.
I think it's important to try and get that data portion in front of everything so that we can look and see and go, okay, what exactly is WRCOG going to study, or the company that we're going to be doing the RFP with, so that we're not doing wish lists, that we're doing whatever the friction issues are from the edge of Temescal Valley to the San Diego County line there, where we're looking and going, are we pushing these friction issues further ahead or in other directions? Because otherwise, we're wasting our time and money. Because if you look at the beautiful expansion in Menifee, and it's funny, Armando, there are certain times of the day, doesn't matter how many lanes you have there, it stops. So that friction was just pushed further north. We all know that. So if we're gonna do this and spend the money on it, let's do it right and get it over with so that we're done with it. Sir?
Yeah.
I just want to remind that in the WRCOG presentation, Caltrans is doing a study on friction points, and so is RCTC with a freeway study. So gathering data may be helpful to first get those two documents to the teams to review before we get back and drill down deeper on what the scope WRCOG would be.
That sounds great. And the Orange County information that the gentleman from the Property Owners Association said we should reach out to Orange County because they had a Y issue. And by the way, Mr. Chairman, just for a closing note, Duncan Hunter, the Congressman Hunter, and Marie Waldron both been notified they will have representatives here.
Okay. Mike?
Just one also closing note. Don't know if this is true, but we've kind of tossed this around as it relates to Caltrans, moving from a capacity agency to a maintenance agency. And some of us were thinking, is that a philosophy that has been handed down by the current administration? You know, the governor on down, saying to people that, we're not gonna build any more roads because we want urbanization. And, we've all had the Agenda 21 zealots in our meetings. Okay, so I don't necessarily wanna invoke that. But there is a movement toward urbanization. There is a movement toward mass transportation. And what we're engaging in runs counter to that. And I wonder if the loggerhead that we may be running into with the state is, at its core, a philosophical issue. That's why the preamble that I'm mentioning is very important. We need to identify that people can't find housing and they can't find jobs unless you help us. And we are the place, this region is the place where it's all occurring.
Amen. It's nice to hear somebody that's Riverside centric. I like it.
And I'm done.
Doing it. So Caltrans, I don't know what year it was, but we used to control the STIP, the State Transportation Improvement Program, right? So that was capacity increasing. And that was taken away from us, I'm not sure what year, but now it's 75% like RCTC local agencies and 25% Caltrans. And Caltrans generally spends on an interregional routes for trucking and stuff. So saying that, there is some philosophical in Sacramento too, but we physically lost control of that money. We actually control very little capacity increasing money now. So that's why, and that's that whole philosophy we're changing to a maintenance and operation organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure, Mike.
And I don't want to hug the mic either, except I get passionate about these things. Is that not Caltrans, but maybe it is Caltrans, or it's the philosophy of the state government that they don't want to build any more lanes. I mean, they're in charge of the interstate highway system, okay, them along with the feds. So when they say, we're done helping you, they've literally made the statement that they're shunting this responsibility over to the local agencies. They've made that statement. And we can't afford that. And then at the same time, none of us can afford that ticket. That's just too great. Where's it gonna come from? At the same time, this is not addressed towards you, so I'm just saying this is a philosophical thing. At the same time, we had SB 1 that passed and Prop 69 that's going to be on the ballot. And they're handed us we're at the poker table and we got a hand that really stinks. Agree with taxes and get the money we need to do the local infrastructure because that's the hand the state dealt us, or protest taxes and don't get the money. It's a stinky hand. Everybody feels however they feel, and I don't want to get into anybody's politics, but that source of money is very important. And I think we're going to get the STIP money that's been allocated because it's been paid already. So hopefully that doesn't change. That's what I'm hearing from RCTC. Moving forward after that, particularly if SB 1 is repealed, who knows what happens. I don't know what happens from there. But Prop 69 designates that money needs to be spent on transportation issues, and so even then people don't trust it, that there's some shenanigans involved in that they'll just shut money from another, from another account that they were funding transportation because now they have that. So it's, who knows? But I guess my point is all of us need to take that back to our cities and our constituents, and it's a hot potato. You and I, we probably think the same, we just have a different approach, and it's a tough one, because I could easily think like you, and I bet you probably could think like me as well.
I enjoy these passionate dialogues because it forces to the surface some of the hard choices we have to make.
Yeah.
If you don't want to make a choice, you shouldn't be sitting in these chairs. So I appreciate the dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
And I'm done.
And on that note, Mr. Butler.
If I could make one plea to my counterparts at the other cities, Betsy could use some help
Yes.
supporting the task force. So I'll reach out to the counterparts, see if we can get some names of some folks, whether there be analysts in public works or managers' offices, but she could use some help supporting the task force.
Great. And I'd like to make one other offer a recommendation here is, and I know all my colleagues from Temecula aren't going to appreciate this, but given that we're ending this meeting close to 6 o'clock and we're dumping everybody back onto the freeway at what arguably, according to your study, is the worst possible time, first, apologize for that, but second, this is a regional issue. Let's make sure it's regional, and maybe we need to start bringing this meeting to other cities as well, rather than just having it here in Temecula. So if I have a volunteer city who would like to host this next, I'd be appreciative.
I don't have any issue with talking to my colleagues and doing that. I think that's a great idea.
All right. Let's see if we can march our way forward north from here. How about that? We hit Murrieta next, and then we'll just slowly share in the pain.
Well, we heard, Vicky, that you're gonna serve steak and lobster, and it would be a midday meeting, so there we go.
Perfect.
Motion to adjourn?
Let's do it. Okay, thank you so much. Take care, everyone.